Good afternoon, and welcome to the Mosaic Human Capital Solutions Lunch and Learn series, a chance for business owners and operators and human resource professionals to learn tips for filling the hiring gap in this tight labor market. Our aim is to bring practical discussion to the issues we see in the talent acquisition marketplace. The premise of this series is to offer practical guidance to mid-market company leadership on how to fill the gaps we see in the talent acquisition practices today. I'm Colette Kernigan, Director of Business Development for Mosaic Human Capital Solutions, a professional services company focused on delivering human resource solutions to client companies. In addition to maintaining an HR consulting book of business, Mosaic Human Capital offers fractional HR services, turnkey startup, and recruiting and retention support. With me is Mosaic founder Henry Martinez, former Senior Vice President of Human Resources for Valero Energy Corporation and CST Brands, as well as Luke Sessler, Mosaic Director of Operations. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So guys, in the first episode of Filling the Hiring Gap, we shared a general overview. And then in the second episode, we covered applicant tracking systems, why they are essential in this labor market, as well as how one goes about maximizing ATS capability to accomplish hiring goals. On today's episode, we will discuss candidate experience. So Henry, what can listeners expect to gain in the next 30 minutes?
Sure. Thanks everybody that's tuning in for the continued series that we're offering here. Colette, I think for us, as we talked about earlier, we really just want to have good, candid, practical discussion around the various gaps that we see, and candidate experience is another one of those gaps that we notice with a lot of the clients that we interact with from a talent acquisition standpoint. And as everybody knows, the labor market has gotten dramatically more difficult, particularly for those employers that are trying to recruit into 100% on-site, work schedules. The candidate flow has just been reduced to almost nothing. And so in that context, if employers are experiencing dramatically reduced applicant flow, then it kind of increases the importance, the sensitivity around how you treat each candidate that does apply to you. And as I think some of our listeners know, our book of business is middle market focused. And in that particular case, we just think there are dramatic gaps on different pieces of the talent acquisition process. But at the end of the day, folks that are applying, that are taking the time to say, hey, company ABC, I would like to work for you. And they either go dark, or there's no response, or the responses are delayed. It's just what we call friction. It's friction in this labor market. It's friction that has to be removed if you want to perform better. And so at the end of the day, we really just want to talk through our, sort of our top 5 practical topics to focus on if you're an owner operator, or if you're an HR, director or VP. They're subtle details, but they're important. And I think for the listeners, just kind of listening to some very practical discussion, and I think they'll have some good takeaways, some good nuggets, at the end of our discussion.
Well, great introduction, Henry. I think these 5 topics on candidate experience, maybe there are 5 must-dos. They come up a lot in our day-to-day conversation. And when they do, we repeatedly say that at the top of the list is responsiveness. So what exactly do we mean by responsiveness? And why is being responsive so important? And then finally, how can employers be responsive?
Yeah, no, we do talk about it a lot. And the 2 words that we like to use a lot in our office, and I think employers in general need to adopt it, are the words real and time, real time. And the labor market, again, so challenging. You've got to really focus on each aspect, each step of the process, and being responsive to your applicant is just critical. Luke and I see it unfortunately all the time. There are still hiring processes that were sort of functional and productive pre-pandemic, when you had 150, 200 applicants, and you could have a little bit of a delay in your response and getting, and responding to an applicant, and not be as proactive managing the process. But that really has gone by the wayside. So we like the term real time. It's not easy. It's not easy for a company that has a recruiter managing multiple requisitions. But I think that's the sort of unpacking, that's the friction that owners and HR directors have to unpack. They have to figure out how we can be more responsive, get to our applicants in real time and engage the relationship in real time. And that's kind of a simplistic way of looking at it, but that's the type of responsiveness we think you have to have with a candidate that's applied, that has the qualifications, that's willing to work, your schedule and your pay range. Being quicker and faster than your competition is, again, it's just critical. Being first to establish the relationship, and it can flow all the way through, from the time of application to scheduling, the interviews and making decisions. But just making responsiveness top of mind and doing it quickly and accurately is what we consider to be a best practice. Building your workflows to really work like that, we just think is key. And again, anyone that's not operating at that level has friction in their process.
Interesting. So, in addition to responsiveness, what would be the next consideration in your mind?
And so I think for me, the next thing that comes to mind would be the employer brand. I think it's important to keep in mind that marketing is just as important to recruiting as recruiting itself. It's equal parts. So two things that come to mind under the brand aspect, and that's going to be careers page and social media. When we're talking about the careers page, the most important thing is to make sure that it's easy to find. You don't want a candidate to go to a website and have to click under resources and opportunities and then careers and view jobs. And the next thing you know, you have these 4 or 5 different steps just for someone to access your job opportunities. The market today has made it so easy for people to just find jobs, whether it's on Google, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, to where if you want people to come to your website and truly learn about what opportunities you have, you need to make it easy for them to locate. The next parts of that would be making sure that the careers page is easy to use, making sure your applications are shortened and not super long, because candidates will get disengaged through the process and move on somewhere else. Another important aspect is highlighting what's important to your company. You can put that front and center on your careers page, highlighting benefits, perks, could even be testimonials, just trying to lure and attract, why people think they should join your company. And then another commonly overlooked part is integrating your ATS into your careers page. You can do that in a couple different ways. You could do an iframe, which is basically just an extended window of the ATS into the careers page, or you can even go further into detail and build your own custom careers page. So that way you're feeding all of your information to Google to get more volume to your website. But there's just a lot of different details to look at when integrating your ATS into your careers page. But bottom line, you want to make it easy to use and easy to find. And then the second part to all of the branding is the social media. Again, equal parts marketing. So we need to be thinking in that mindset of how to appeal to different people looking in different areas. Facebook and LinkedIn are 2 great examples of that. We always want to keep posting our jobs on those 2 different social media platforms. And then you also want to build a cadence of putting out advertisements, job ads. So that way you can start building a following on your social media. And as you're getting bigger following, more people are starting to apply to your jobs. So they really coincide side by side. And then you want to integrate your ATS into your social media platforms to just make sure everything is well connected. And that way applicants are being communicated, effectively. And then the other parts of the social media is Glassdoor and Indeed. I know people think of those as traditional job boards or places to post opportunities, but an overlooked area is the employee reviews. So employees actually go on there, review the companies that they've worked for. So we always want to make sure that we're reviewing that, making sure we have our images and logos on there, and just building a good presence for anyone that visits the page.
Those are some great pointers, Luke. Moving on, what would we say is our number 3 must do?
Colette, before we maybe chat about that, I just want to go back and reiterate something on the employer brand. And you're right; those were, all of those comments were outstanding that Luke just shared. But for the owner operator that's listening, some of those workflows and those strategies may be, something that obviously they're just not familiar with. But I think the question that an owner operator needs to ask themselves is, if somebody applies to my company, how do I want them to be treated? What do I want them to experience? And if they just think about that, then all of the things Luke just shared, fall into place. And again, for that owner operator that doesn't live in the HR world, the way we do, that job seeker that applied to your company also applied to 5 or 6 other companies in the 15 minutes that they were sitting down or on their phone, submitting applications. So it goes back to who can establish, which brand, if you will, is quicker, faster, more efficient, and can establish that relationship sooner. And it really does lay great groundwork that if a company takes that part serious, then it'll flow into onboarding, because that's obviously the next, critical piece. It's not just hiring experience, it's then the onboarding experience. But those are, really are good, outstanding, practical, functional thoughts. In terms of number 3, it really just sort of continues, that relationship. So, if we're getting folks to be more responsive, they are taking their employee or employer brand serious, they're applying resources to it, or they're finding the right partners, they're putting the right technologies in. The next part of that whole process is the communication process. So again, if we remember that a relationship is, the employer relationship is a relationship. So it does have to be based on communication. Job seekers are going to gravitate to the employer that, again, reaches out first, has good people managing their process, is establishing a good rapport, and then they receive good, timely feedback communication. And a lot of what we do like to do is obviously automate and do our workflows, but at the same time, there's no substitute for just good old-fashioned somebody picking up the phone and calling the candidate and kind of telling them, interacting with them, managing their experience through the process. Again, a little bit of effort on the part of employers really does stand out, because again, even in today's market, we've already said it, there's still just a lot of bad practices out there. We like to unfortunately say sometimes, HR is broke in a lot of instances. So, what does that mean? So again, it goes back to real-time phone calls, real-time engagement. Lots of really good tools out there that can be used to augment the communication process. We're big fans of Calendly here in our office, but I'm sure there are many other tools out there that just make it easy for candidates to schedule a time to talk, and time to with the recruiter. could be with the hiring authority. That tool can be used a lot of different ways. Texting, of course, is just another platform that people have gotten very accustomed to, dealing and working through text. From our perspective, we think candidates are very receptive to it, particularly if you've already have the relationship established and you just need to text updates. The next scheduled meeting. Hey, we're going to change the start time from 10 to 11. Just that type of quick on the fly communication through texting is just another, really good platform. We like for all these tools to be integrated if possible, into the ATS. That way, for somebody that's managing the process, they can really see all these touch points, with the candidate. But, a lot of times, it's usually a combination of all these things, some direct phone, verbal contact, maybe email to have them register and do some workflows, potentially text messaging for quick updates. So just really that kind of fluid, flexible approach that just keeps communication at a really, really, really high level is what we advocate for.
Sure. And then, elaborate on communication. How does that extend to the interview process itself, Luke?
Yeah, great question. So the interview process, I think of three words, and it's fast, clear, and transparent. So we definitely need a fast interview process, but it also needs to be accurate. So whenever we're thinking about interviewing, again, kind of goes back to what Henry just mentioned. What's that impression? What do we want people to see when they interact with the company? And a lot of that is also in the interview process itself, who they're interacting with, how fast, how slow it is, how transparent people are being with the information that they're giving to these candidates. And I think it all starts with an accurate job description, as simple and basic as that sounds. Whatever you're putting out online, you want to make sure it's accurate, it's clear, it's concise, whether that's sharing salary information. Another big thing to keep in mind is putting on there if it's remote, hybrid, on site, because as we all have seen, it's almost like two different worlds, right? You have the group that wants to work remote and then the world that wants to work on site. And so, just by putting that out there, if you want on-site only, put that on there. That way, folks that want remote and are looking for that exclusively aren't wasting their time, and they're not wasting your time either. So it kind of there's a double-edged sword there. We just want to attract the right candidates that we're trying to cater towards, and then leaning out your process. So, I understand that there's a time and place for panel interviews. We're fans of those for the right types of roles. But try and just have your hiring managers, your decision makers, the people that are going to be managing that person have the control over the interview process. Candidates just don't stick around as long as they used to. Henry mentioned that they're usually applying to 5, 6, maybe even 10, 12 jobs, similar to the one that y'all just posted. So we need to make sure that we're moving the process along so that way we have the best chance to convert those candidates as hires. And then being transparent through the beginning of the process, through the initial conversations, letting them know how many steps are in the interview process, and just moving as quickly to the offer as possible. And then the last point I want to make on that is sharing feedback with candidates that are not selected, because we want to keep in mind, it goes back to the employer brand. We want to be communicative during the process. We want to let them know, even if it's a generic, you're not selected message, because the people that interact with the company are going to be the biggest advocates going forward. And it's really going to determine whether they have any interest in the company in the future or not.
So where would technology come into factor in all this? I'm thinking about the ATS.
Yeah, call it, if I can, before we move to that topic, I just had a couple of topics I wanted to kind of reinforce, following up with Luke's comments.
Sure.
And I just wanted to draw out, Luke mentioned, and I agree with him, where we too are advocates for panel interviews. And, panel interviews got big, 15, 20 years ago. Employers like them because it gives input and buy-in from multiple people. And there was a time when that really did work well because you had an overwhelming applicant flow. Again, if we fast forward to what we're experiencing today, we don't have that workflow. And, as we kind of see the friction, now if we've got multiple people to schedule for an interview, now we're starting to push our interview timing out a week and a half, maybe even 2 weeks before, everyone on the panel, can participate. That's not good. We have seen that hurt more than help in this particular labor market. For those companies, and again, we're advocates for it, but the kind of questions we like to ask internally is to what extent is having 5 or 6 highly compensated employees involved with the selection of one FTE that's not as highly compensated, how much influence does all 3, 4, 5, 6 people have? And are they really being selective, or are they just sort of, I wouldn't say rubber stamping, but obviously endorsing the hire? So how much time are we spending? How much internal costs do we have dedicated to making that one decision? Versus knowing in your organization who is absolutely prolific at evaluating talent, evaluating them accurately, and then being able to make a decision on behalf of the company. And if you track the hires and if you track their development, somebody inside the organization is really good at it. That's who I want making hiring decisions. And so I think there's opportunities for companies to really, kind of pressure test that. The other thing I want to mention about interview process is assessments. We do see, particularly here in the local market, assessments that are not validated for pre-employment selection being used for pre-employment selection. And I think that's something as an organization, there needs to be some internal discussion about that. Again, we are strong advocates for pre-employment selection tools, but we are also staunch advocates that they be validated for pre-employment selection. When you start using these tools in the hiring process, there is an impact to the candidate, depending on how long the assessment is, depending on that person's knowledge of whether that instrument is validated or not for pre-employment selection. Those can be telltale signs to a job seeker of what it will be like to work for this organization. So we've always said at Mosaic, a good process run by good people using good tools will always generate the best result. So I think organizations that are using those assessment tools, they need to be used the right way, and particularly when you're recruiting at the executive level and you're using those assessments, there's just a lot of other things that need to be taken into consideration. All of that impacts the candidate experience. So I just wanted to reiterate those couple of items. Going back to your question on technology, Colette, I think folks that have listened to this series know we are staunch advocates for technology too. You really want to use all the tools that are out there that help engage job seekers the way they like to engage. By far, candidates have become even much more electronic today than they were historically. All the job boards that everybody uses are databases. Episode 2, we talked about the ATS. The ATS is always the nucleus of what your talent acquisition experience is going to be. For those people that have a lot of experience with ATS selection or just ATS usage on different platforms, all of these, workflow connections, all of these texting, integrated texting, integrated VoIP, are all ways to just make the candidate experience cleaner, have good documentation, so that over time, as you're making hopefully more and more hires, you have data that you can go back and you can look at what your touch points were, how quickly you engaged, what tools did you use for scheduling, how responsive was the candidate, how quick was your decision. And ultimately we can't improve anything that we're not tracking.
Mhm.
Otherwise you're just guessing. And unfortunately there is a lot of guessing, particularly again in the middle market space when it comes to human resources, because the technology platforms are simply not in place. But I think I know we're kind of getting towards the end of our session, but for folks that want to improve their experience long term, you want to get good technology and good integration in place. You don't have to do it all at once. You need to get a good core system. So whether that's your core payroll that has an ATS component to it or just a standalone ATS, you got to get that in place, and then you start building it. It's an ongoing process. There's no perfect system out there, but technology definitely has a place for companies that want to invest in their own brand, build their own brand, control the experience of candidates that are interacting with them. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Luke, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add. I know you like technology as much as I do.
Yeah, I guess without going into the weeds too much, you hit on the main three things, which was technology stack integrations. There's a ton of them out there. Data, building a baseline, and then the automation piece, which again goes back to communication, being fast, clear, good experience overall. So yeah, I think those are all great points.
So, Luke, Henry, any final thoughts on candidate experience?
Not probably without trying to reiterate anything, Colin, I just want to encourage the listeners, particularly again, owner operators. I mean, this is we've been working on this our entire career, so we really do focus on this a lot. I'm sure our HR listeners out there understood everything we said and are probably pulling these levers already. Just like CRMs played a role in marketing 20 years ago, customer relationship management, we're just trying to get our clients to think more like that. Your ATS actually is becoming a CRM. A lot of the ATSs out there have CRM capability to it. It was sort of built probably for the recruiting staffing industry because that's their business, is to manage data well. We just think employers need to invest in their brand, and all of the money frankly that is being spent to generate applicant flow, that employer needs to capture that data. That's their data, they paid for it, so capture it, and long term use it, because again, these are the folks that ask for consideration from your company. So that might just be my last thought. It's fluid, it's going to evolve over time, but I think the message is just don't ignore it, because it can be a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. So thank you, Henry, Luke. I want to remind everyone that upcoming episodes of Filling the Hiring Gap will be on efficient workflows and then later KPIs. And the next episode will air in the next few weeks. In the meantime, you can direct comments or questions to Henry, Luke, or myself by phone or email. Our information is going to show on the next screen. Thank you so much for joining us for this third episode of Mosaic Human Capital's Filling the Hiring Gap Lunch and Learn series. Please know we welcome your thoughts, questions, and participation in this critical conversation. Stay well, and we look forward to seeing you soon.